Unending Coil of Bahamut, The Weapons Refrain, The Epic of Alexander, Dragonsong's Reprise, The Omega Protocol, and joining them in about a month, Futures Rewritten. These are the hardest raids in Final Fantasy XIV, the pinnacle of battle content that can take seasoned groups upwards of 100 hours to complete on release before guides are accessible. There are also the hypest moments in the entire streaming category for the game, bringing upwards of 10,000 viewers together for a week of good memes and seeing the most cinematic phases the development team can put together. Let's talk about the new one today. To some, the idea of bashing your head against an almost 20-minute encounter for upwards of 100 hours to solve it sounds like the least fun thing imaginable. I know this for a fact because every time I upload a video about hardcore prog, I get at least a handful of comments talking about how they'd rather put their toes in an ankle grinder than try to overcome something difficult. But for every person that balks at the idea of ultimates, there's another that relishes the idea of facing up against a challenge and knowing that one day your perseverance will result in you coming out on top. That feeling of making progress, whilst the victory is a small one, makes it all worth it. Seeing a whole new phase is an adrenaline rush and feels so rewarding, and doing it with 7 friends, giving yourselves an excuse to get together and hang out and do something fun as a group for all that time, unbeatable. I look so fondly back on the 3 ultimates I got to get that experience with, T, DSR and Top, and I'm excited to add a 4th to that list. If you want my sales pitch on why you should try an ultimate if you haven't already, here it is. The shiny weapons ain't shit. You know what's much better? How good you feel when you clear. The friends you make from progging. The improvement you feel in your gameplay. The sense of community as people come to congratulate you one by one when you finally get the dub. And even before that clear, like I said, each step forward still has those fierce positive feelings attached to them. It looks harder than it is, and whilst yes, it's hard, a lot of that progression time comes from figuring out the mechanics and developing a working strategy. It's not quite as daunting a few weeks after release once proper resources are released and available. You can do it on your own schedule and based on your personal availability, and if it isn't for you, that's okay too. Futures Rewritten deviates from the standard pattern the previous ultimates have had. We got a raid and a story A Realm Reborn ultimate, then a story and a raid Heavensward ultimate, and then most recently a raid Stormblood ultimate. But we are skipping a story Stormblood feature and moving straight forward to Shadowbringers this time around. Will we ever go back and explore what we missed? Honestly, I don't think so, because we have so much peak to explore in the next 3 ultimates if we get back on track and continue the aforementioned trend that I can't see any real reason to go backwards. We have a long time to wait though, considering we'll have gotten, 6 ultimate releases in 7 years? So in another 3 years, we might get to see our 1v1 with Xenos, but reincarnated as a post-Endsinger final phase. But for now, we can be content with beating up Thancred and seeing the teenage girly pops fuse into a Giga Oracle of Darkness. But what am I hoping for from this new fight, both mechanically and aesthetically? What do I hope Square Enix has learned from their past endeavors? Which new things should be brought in, and how should you prepare for it? That's what we're going to be discussing today. Firstly, I think Dragonsong's Reprise is the best fight in the whole damn game. And a big part of that is how well the alternate timeline story is weaved in each phase and mechanic with care and precision. The development team also carefully considered how will players solve and experience this through each phase and major highlight point. I think the entire lead up to Rewind is an excellent example where you'll push through Thordan and Nidstinian for the first time, come up against the Eyes, likely at some point during learning that section, come up against the Enrage of the Eyes and witness Nidhogg's dragon form at full force. You lose, you go again, master the Eyes and witness the first Rewind, and with it, the fight's key puzzle. They want you to go through those emotions of confusion, elation, and disappointment as you realize where you are, that maybe you can save Harshaphon as he darts onto the scene to protect you, and then the pain of you failing once more, and even should you defeat the Knights, you phase back to Thordan, and this hellish loop begins once more. They want you to consider the details and how to break the loop, and once you eventually do and you see that timeline split, they want to send you on a roller coaster once more as your victorious moment turns to ash in your realization that you've just made everything worse. The entire fight story-wise is just excellent, and it compels you to want to get further in so you can witness more firsthand. To play as well, it excels. I firmly believe that Phase 3, where you battle against Justinian in his dragon-corrupted form, is one of the most well put together 2-minute uptime cycles Final Fantasy XIV has to offer. Conceptually, it's simple, with tight positioning, multiple strategies that yield success, and a large quantity of permutations and moving parts that ensure you need to fully digest and understand the entirety of the dance in order for your party to get through. Death of the Heavens as well is fantastic. In fact, I think a lot of the Thordan trios are some of the best ultimate trios that have been conceived as well. What I hope they bring forward from this, firstly, is the attention to detail and care for the way they tell the story through the encounter, and the confidence to show us a future so far removed from that which actually took place in the main story. I also really like ultimate phases that are intended as spectator sections, in this case the rewind itself. Those sections that are unimpressive once guides are available, but exist to bring together viewers and forerunning groups alike in trying to solve the puzzle, culminating in that eureka moment that everybody shares. Ubu did this too with the Primal Awakenings, and T with the True Heart, but DSR gave us the best overall execution of it as far as I'm concerned. The Omega Protocol is a much more divisive entry. I liked it personally, mostly, but it definitely has problems and has caused negative aspects of the Final Fantasy XIV community to flourish. Phase 5's design was put together in such a way to be much easier with voice communication, or one player stepping up and taking ownership of mobilizing specific players into their positions for each of the trios, leading to the mass proliferation of third-party tools to circumvent that by the majority of the player base, which in turn neutered the difficulty and enjoyment in executing that entire section of the encounter. I definitely see arguments regularly occur that state that there is no difference between using a third-party tool or having somebody mark for you, which to me doesn't really make sense because you are completely removing the possibility of a failure state by using a bot, whereas a player taking control of it still has that failure state possible, even if the demand has been placed onto one player instead of spread among the group. That was absolutely developer oversight, and I hope there is more consideration taken on how they expect the user base to solve these mechanics going forward, so that relying on Optimus Prime to do all the work for you isn't the most reasonable solution for the majority of players. With that said, I'm of the opinion that Alpha Omega is the best final phase of all of the Ultimates. The Limit Break All-Out War is one of the most visually striking, exhilarating sections of gameplay in the entire MMO, and it is a perfect, simple, tight execution check after the slog that just came before it. Top has a couple of these moments that are just breathtaking. Blue Screen is another one that genuinely gave me goosebumps when I was doing it for the first time. I hope they bring this forward into Futures Rewritten, the best of both, and something new as well. The Eden storyline is the domain of beloved characters Rin and Gaia, and based on the pre-release material we can expect firstly that we'll be directly fighting both of them, and that secondly we will see some kind of fused form of the two of them combined. We also know for a fact that Fatebreaker will be present, and we can predict this as either an early phase or maybe even the introductory phase of the entire fight. Let's look properly at these 3 screenshots that Square Enix has shown off at the previous live letters. Firstly, we can see Fatebreaker present here, so we know full well it's going to be a playable uptime phase. My expectation is that this will be a very early component of the overall fight, taking up, like I said, most likely the first or at a push second phase of the encounter. As well as the boss channeling a mechanic, this serpent animation is used for a number of his attacks, including Burnt Strike and Bound of Faith, with the element combined with it providing the tell as to exactly how the sequence will play out. So the boss is casting a lightning variant of whatever telegraph will occur. In this case, I'm guessing it's the expanding line AoE, but we'll have to wait and see for confirmation. We can also see 3 tethers linked to players, which seems to be a fire on the left and a lightning on the middle and right. Although we can't see the middle ad very well at all, or even if it is an identical ad to the other 2, what we can see is that it's lightning via the tether color being identical to the right-hand lightning tether. The core of Fatebreaker's loop involves him imbuing his casts with fire, lightning, or light, and each having different effects, so this makes sense to me. In E11S, these tethers, when lightning aspected, would shoot massive cleaves to the two nearest players and needed to be aimed away from the rest of the groups. These were intended for tanks, but seeing as there's two lightning tethers here, either they will execute in sequence rather than simultaneously, or they will do survivable damage to non-tanks and will need to be baited away by a total of 4 players. The fire tether is a stack. So if we break it down, there's a stack marker, 4 cleaves coming from players close to the lightning tethers, and an expanding boss AoE that needs to be avoided. Resolve. There is no way that fire stack is going to be survivable with 2 players, so let's assume that 4 will be enough to take it, which based on previous Final Fantasy XIV fight design is pretty likely with some mitigation. Then you need to bait 4 cleaves from the 2 lightning tethers. Don't you run out of players for that? Well, if each lightning tether player baits a cleave from the other lightning tether player by positioning close to one another, it resolves the issue. Then the last 2 players will take the other 2 lightning cleaves and bait them away from one another and also away from the lightning stack. Positioning will need to be fairly tight because you're going to need to resolve all of these mechanical constraints while avoiding whatever the boss is going to do. But that's okay, it's an ultimate after all, seems pretty cool to me. The other actual mechanic we've seen is from a different phase entirely. Gaia in her Oracle of Darkness form takes up another one of the phases, and we can anticipate that this is not the only form in which she'll be participating in futures Rewritten. This is pretty clearly quadruple apocalypse. In the original Savage encounter, we saw single, double, and triple APOC during its runtime, and seeing this return was very much anticipated and expected. There will definitely 100% be more things happening while this is going off. Essentially, these lights around the sides of the arena telegraph the direction of travel that huge, pulsing circular AoEs will shortly take, and your job will be to dodge them whilst dealing with unforeseen additional components. Having 4 of these going off at once is certainly going to be interesting, and I'm excited to see what else they throw at us. In terms of unforeseen mechanics I'd love to witness, I hope we draw a lot of inspiration from E8S because there's a myriad of gold just waiting to be mined there, and yes, I am including Light Rampant. That is 100% showing up in some way, and honestly, it should as well. The community's hatred for that mechanic was incredibly overblown, and it's going to be funny to hear that brain-grinding wipe noise all over again. I'm also hoping they lean quite heavily into the spell in waiting present in both Voidwalker and Oracle of Darkness during at least one of the phases. I think those mechanics were fantastic, but were somewhat hampered by being in Savage, whereas in Ultimate, where the ceiling is allowed to be much higher, we can see more in-depth sequences over extended periods of time where you need to keep track of a handful of different timers on yourself and also simultaneously be aware of how they're going to interact with the rest of the party as well. I'm expecting the majority of the phases to focus primarily on different forms of Rin, Gaia and their eventual combined version, as well as the Eden's Promise, and that we won't see too much of an emphasis on the primals aside from maybe, hopefully, as additional factors in trio mechanics. To be blunt, this is somewhat of a shame to me because E4S Titan is probably my favourite Savage fight in the entire game, and it has so much good that can be drawn in to enrich an Ultimate with a close to 20-minute runtime. Honestly, Leviathan 2 and Raktapaxa as well as Ramu. All of the Eden Primals had interesting factors and were solid showings as far as I'm concerned, though like Omega, I expect they'll have minimal representation in favour of the story-centric characters. I'm still a little bit salty that we didn't see any Kefka in Ultimate. I imagine we'll be getting a trailer including the Ultimate in the next live letter, which occurs in just a few days, and I cannot wait to see more. If you're planning on attempting it yourself, I have a few pieces of advice. Firstly, try and get your group or some friends together to run the Eden raids at minimum item level, focusing primarily on E2S, E8S, E11S, and E12S as the prime targets, with the others being nice to have, but slightly less essential. Do them on minimum item level, so that you not only have to properly engage with and correctly execute what's presented to you, but so that you also gain an understanding on roughly how hard certain cast bars should be hitting, so that in the moment when you're in Futures Rewritten, you can immediately discern whether an upcoming attack is a potential problem or not. There's also a really good gear syncing spreadsheet publicly available that is the best way to simulate how Eden raids were on release. I'll link it in the description if I remember, and if I don't, ask and I'll make sure to update it as soon as possible. Secondly, is to do some ultimates if you're out of practice. In general, these fights have a much quicker cadence of mechanics, executing one after another in much faster succession than is the case in easier pieces of content, and if you haven't been into them for a while, they can take you by surprise. So a refresher to get comfortable with that speed is always useful. Just a few more weeks until we get to see the finished product. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.